Introduced through the pages of The Amazing Spider-Man, Marvel Comics' The Punisher grew from an anti-hero of unknown origins, merely intent with ridding the crime world, to becoming a symbol of vengeance for not only fictional characters but real-world heroes. But the last few years or so haven't been kind to the criminal-killing character, especially his menacing skull logo that struck fear in the hearts and minds of bad guys. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's start at the beginning. All the way back in 1974, nearly 5 decades ago, when Marvel introduced the gun-toting anti-hero, back in Amazing Spider-Man number 129. A villain known as the Jackal hired the Punisher to take out Spider-Man. Being told the web-slinger is a murderous criminal who the New York Police Department can't touch, Punisher accepts the job and goes after Spidey. After getting knocked around by a concussion blast, Punisher tells Spider-Man that it's his job to take out murderers like him, but before Spidey can make his defense, the Jackal intercedes, and Spider-Man seemingly falls to his death from a building. Jackal and Punisher don't know that Spidey got away, and Punisher is irate that Spider-Man's death was unjust. These are the building blocks of who the Punisher is. Readers are given just a glimpse. Yes, he kills, but he kills for a reason. He does not enjoy it. He doesn't kill for the sake of killing. He wants to rid the world of criminals because it has to be done and there's no one else to do it. These building blocks are what give a murdering character like the Punisher an anti-hero symbolic mask instead of a villain's. He feels like he's doing something for the right reasons and because no one else can. Is it wrong? Yes, but in the eyes of the Punisher, these terrible people he's killing are getting away with far worse, and he's the only one who can stop them. The debut of Punisher ends with him walking into the shadows after his friend is murdered by the Jackal, all in an attempt to frame him. The next time we see him, it's just a few issues down the road, still an Amazing Spider-Man. Spidey's in trouble, and after a brief confrontation once again, this time they decide to team up and take down Tarantula and his goons. It isn't until 1 year after his debut, in 1975, that the Punisher has his first solo story in the pages of Marvel Preview number 2. It's here that readers finally learned a little more about the man they called Punisher. Home from the military, the family goes for a picnic and sees the mob executing someone. The building blocks first shown in his debut as Spider-Man are solidified in one page. He's a loving husband, whose wife and kids dote on. He tries to get his family safe, but the mobsters open fire on everyone. Aside from his tragic origin, we're also given more character building. He served in Vietnam, and we're shown a base of operations that looked very high-tech for its time. We're also treated to a little bit more with Punisher's intelligence. He's contemplated. He even has a humorous side. After getting a former ally to help him out, he tells his buddy the usual rates will be applied to any information he gets. And guess what? He'll even add a tip. What kind of tip? The friend asks. Stop smoking. The next solo Punisher story would come the following year, in 1976, the pages of Marvel Super Action. Unlike his first solo outing, and the numerous cameos with Spider-Man, Captain America, and Daredevil, Marvel Super Action would finally show a more mature Punisher shooting multiple people in his quest for revenge. But it wasn't until 1986, 12 years after his debut, that the Punisher would finally receive his first solo series. Based on the letter columns, fans were intrigued by this character. Some agreed with his methods and some didn't, but they all could see the struggle of deciding whether the Punisher was doing what was just or not. In this first miniseries, Circle of Blood, readers are finally given a full picture of just who the Punisher is. Frank Castle is sent to prison, and everyone knows who this guy is. Most are afraid of him. The ones that aren't learn to be. We get reintroduced to Jigsaw, who would later become a mainstay villain of the character. But issue 1 sets up something else, where Frank is introduced to an organization called The Trust. They offer Frank a way out of prison and set him up with backing for his war. What follows in the following 5 issues is Frank destroying the mob organizations around town, making it seem like each of them is making a play for the top spot, now that the Kingpin is seemingly dead. It's a great miniseries that gets to the heart of Frank Castle. He was a husband and father. Now he's out for blood, but there is a code that he follows. After the Circle of Blood miniseries, Frank Castle is off and running. He's given his own ongoing series, which starts in 1987. Frank Castle continues his one-man war, wiping out criminals who've gone too far. The main series starts off reading like old private eye, hard-boiled detective shows, with a distinct tone from Mike Baron and later with arcs from Chuck Dixon. Running for over 100 issues, Punisher was often running as 2 spin-off series were published while the regular ongoing series was still being produced. In 1988, Punisher War Journal made his debut, featuring the early works of the great Jim Lee, and in 1992, The Punisher Warzone, which of course has the iconic John Romita Jr. cover. In addition to those publications, there was also The Punisher Magazine, a black and white periodical, and The Punisher Armory, which was a journal of sorts. 5 different Punisher titles. This was the 80s and early 90s. Vigilante justice hero reigned supreme. From Dirty Harry, to Commando, to Van Damme, to friggin' RoboCop. This was the era for vigilante justice heroes. Characters who had their hands tied because of the law, or just flat out refused to go with the law, and took matters into their own hands. This was the era of a man not backing down, and going out to get justice for his loved ones, knowing he could be walking to meet his maker. That's what appealed to fans of The Punisher, and still do. Frank Castle was a man at the end of his rope, where the criminal justice system either can't or won't help him get vengeance for his family, so he has to do it himself. As the 1990s moved along, Punisher's main series came to a close, and the popularity started to die down. A few miniseries were created, but nothing long-lasting. That is until the early 2000s, and Frank Castle received a new lease on life, so to speak. In what has become in many fans' minds the seminal tales of Frank Castle, Garth Ennis wrote a 12-issue series that reignited the allure of the Punisher. After the success of Welcome Back Frank, Punisher was off and running once again. A new ongoing series was created, which eventually morphed into Punisher Max on the Max line of comics, Marvel's supposed adult-oriented comic book tales. After a few years of Punisher stories, though, the allure seemed to die down once again. In an effort to keep their vigilante hero popular, Marvel began infusing the character with gimmicks, whether that be Frankencastle, becoming the Punisher War Machine, or even an alternate timeline version of Ghost Rider called Cosmic Ghost Rider. None of those gimmicks would be the straw that broke the camel's back, though. No, the recent nail in the coffin wasn't a badly constructed story or a wacky take on Frank Castle, but the real world. After Chris Kyle became a widely known Army veteran, holder of the most confirmed sniper kills in American history, the iconic Punisher skull became a beacon of sorts to those in military and law enforcement. Frank Castle was a man with a purpose: to dispose of the bad guys, to finally end criminals who by hook or by crook were able to evade the proper law enforcement agencies. If you were to ask military personnel or civic officers why they used and appreciated the Punisher skull, they would most likely reply, like Marine vet J.D. Williams in a 2020 article from The Vulture, "There is no place for Punisher in society." That said, some of the qualities that the Punisher has are very admirable: strength, tenacity, perseverance, decisiveness. Frank is a compelling character because of his black and white views and the propensity to go from zero to killing based on his perception and code. It is fiction. But to a different segment of the American audience, the Punisher was a bad guy. He was the bad guy. It wasn't that those who adorned themselves with the skull of the Punisher didn't realize what he was doing was amoral and unethical. It's that those who sought to silence the Punisher's fan base are the sort to throw orange paint over a Van Gogh painting while supergluing their hand to it, all in the name of their own justice. To those people, the Punisher is no better than the criminals he dispatches. And with the growing trend of leniency for criminals, even to go as far as to call heinous acts committed by adults on children as disorders, there is no room in those people's minds for a man who stands against crime and does what's necessary when the law of the land either can't or refuses to act. So it goes, the man who started out as an assassin, who grew to become a beacon of blind justice against those who sought to worm their way through the legal system and evade conviction, has now become the target. The Punisher, a veteran who served his country, has now become a hate-monger adorned with a symbol so vile that the company who publishes his exploits morphed it into a symbol of a literal demon. Frank Castle, a man who loved his wife and children and was driven by pure vengeance to avenge them, became a war-torn man, unable to feel anything for his unborn children, and was divorced and left with nothing by his demonly resurrected wife. My hope is that one day Frank Castle will return, and I believe that will be the case. if for nothing else, genres and trends are cyclical. But more than that, the Punisher is a man bent on revenge, not for killing's sake, as some writers would have you believe. He's not a monster driven by pure bloodlust. Frank Castle, the Punisher, is a man driven to avenge those he loves by taking any means necessary to do it, and there will always be a need for that kind of character. The only thing constant is change. One thing that doesn't seem to change, though, is that there are always evil men. Throughout history, evil has been seen time and time again. As a civilized people, we try and do what we can. If everyone were to commit themselves to the cause of Frank Castle, there is no doubt the world could turn into anarchy. But that's the great thing about Frank Castle, about the Punisher. He doesn't live in the real world. He is a figment of our imagination. And when we come across that vile human being who deserves death for heinous acts, we can live vicariously through the Punisher. Carl Potts, the original editor for Circle of Blood, said it best when he said, quote, "There are some universal themes of guilt and responsibility for readers to identify with here. Also, most people have, at some time, found themselves obsessed, or close to it, by a mission or dogma that the light of reason could not conquer. Maybe the aspect most people are attracted to in the Punisher's stories is poetic justice. Seeing criminals who can't be collared by our three branches of government get what's coming to them is pleasurable. We might wish that this happened more often in the real world. Hopefully, at the same time, we all realize that in reality the Punisher's type of justice would probably lead to chaos. However, we can enjoy the cathartic effect the fiction brings us."